Hello everyone, my name is Eddie Bolen. I'm the pastor at Midway United Methodist Church. I'm also the pastor at Edgewater United Methodist Church. I want to thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this video. I want you to think about trust. What happens when you spend some time around people that you trust? How does it make you feel? Do you feel safe? Do you feel secure? Does it make you optimistic or pessimistic? Have you really taken some time lately to think about it? Just spending a little bit of time around people that you trust. During this time that we have shifted into phases and for what has become a reality for us, these safer at home measures, who are you trusting? Have you really kind of taken an inventory and said, these are the kind of people that I trust? Who are the people who you do trust, and you're around them and they make you feel more optimistic? When I was in school several years ago, in fact, more years than I care to remember, but when I was in seminary, I was in Atlanta, I was over at Emory, and I was involved in some community organizing. And so I remember going in, this was our first time meeting with the community. It's a group of students. We were coming from Emory and we were going into this neighborhood in the city of Atlanta. And so we were meeting in a school. The chairs were arranged in this circle. And so it's one of those circles when you come in and you kind of had to move the chairs so that you can get into the circle. And so we were in the circle. We were sitting down. We went through the pleasantries, introduced ourselves, went all the way around the circle. And then the students, we started going into questions. And as we started asking those questions, you could see people, they were kind of moving around in their seats, they were shifting around. A couple of them said a few comments that were rather biting. In fact, a couple of people, they stood up and they came to the back of the circle. That is, they moved the seats, they came to the back of the circle. And in fact, one of them became mad, just angry, and walked out of the building. No, we're students, and we didn't know what was happening. And so then the director of the community came over to us and was talking to us. Our professor came and joined us and talked about some of the questions that we were asking, what was happening there. And guess what? As we went into those questions and as we were asking those questions, the people from the neighborhood, they didn't trust us. And the thing about it is that we're students. We didn't realize that. None of us had picked up on that as people were shifting, as they were moving around. None of us had picked up on the fact that, we were getting into questions that we had in front of us. And the entire time, there was no trust that was coming around that circle. We trusted each other, but we didn't trust, nor did they trust us. Trust is an important thing. And we've talked about what it's like to be around people that we trust. But what's it like to be around people that we don't trust? It makes it really hard to face a time like this when we find ourselves around people that we don't trust. Imagine what would happen if we became people of trust. Imagine what would happen if we would take a few words that are recorded for us in the book of Proverbs. What if we took these words of Proverbs chapter 3 in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, what if we took these words from Proverbs chapter 3, 2 verses, verse 5 and 6, and what if we became people of trust? Listen to these words. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. I'm reading from a translation of the Bible called the New Revised Standard Version, the NRSV. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. What would happen if not only we were trustworthy people, are people of trust, but what would happen if our trust in God became so crystal clear, that we had so much clarity around our own trust in God, that it became a default decision to us? Well, what What if it was more than just a default decision, but what if we became people who had a habit of trusting in the Lord with all of our hearts? Now, I'm sure that you're like me. I'm certain that you have probably been around people, you have seen people in your life who have lived these words before. These words are Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Where it was not just a memory verse for them, wasn't just Old Testament scripture, a quaint proverb for them, but they actually lived. They actually lived by these words. They were people who were. They were people who were more optimistic about the future. They were people that when you were around them, they brought to you, there was a calmer spirit that they brought to you, that when you started to worry, that you knew that these are people who, because of their trust in the Lord, that you knew that you could share your worries, and you knew that you wouldn't just be looking for a solution. You wouldn't just be looking for somebody to listen to you, but what you would find is that because of their trust in the Lord, that you will feel better about your own life. You will feel better about your own situation. I'm talking about, and I'm sure that you know them, those people that have been in your past, those people that are right now, those people that you are certainly going to come across in the future, those people that put their whole hearts and their whole trust in the Lord in such a way that if just one of them have been in that circle that I was talking about earlier with this group from a neighborhood in Atlanta, and then this group of students who knew nothing coming into that circle, I'm sure that if their presence in that circle had been there, that they would have, because of their trust in the Lord and the way that it flowed through their lives, that they could have been the very people that could have enabled that meeting to continue going on. Because one of the great things about it is that trust, it spreads among people. It's contagious when we're one-on-one, but it spreads like wildfire in a group. You've seen it before. I've seen it before. And others, when we know what trust in the Lord with all of our heart, we know what it looks like. We have absolute clarity in the lives of other people what it looks like. But yet now we are the ones. We are the very ones with the mission of living the words, trust in the Lord with all of your heart around our families. We are the ones that have that mission to live those words in our neighborhood, in our church. And this is how we do it. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart as we begin phases of reopening. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart while watching the trackers showing the amount of deaths and cases that are happening specifically in your county. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart as you consider, should I wear a mask or not? Trust in the Lord with all of your heart as you pause and consider, is this something that is healthy for me to do? Is this a place that is healthy for me to go to? You see, that's how it starts. That's how new habits begin. We begin those new habits by doing, well, what people for centuries have done. We meditate on these words. We repeat these words. We talk about these words in our own minds. And as we face those moments in the midst of crisis, like we are all in right now, we say to ourselves, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. I heard a social worker, you may have heard of her before. Her name is Brene Brown. She's a social worker. She's also a researcher. She had a really famous TED Talk, a couple of them several years ago, kind of spurred her notoriety. But Brene Brown, she, in this midst of the coronavirus and COVID-19, she was on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago. And she said she's been having conversations with friends, conversations with families, conversations with people. She's got a national following, people that have been reaching out to her and people have been contacting her. And she said that she was having a conversation. She just all of a sudden thought to herself, she says, it's just the gravity of everything that's surrounding us. And she said, you know what? We are the ones that are the adults in the room. She said in her own mind, she said, I kept looking around, who are those people who are leading us? Who are those adults that are in the room that are guiding us? And then she said, I realized It's us. That we are the ones that are doing this. We are the ones that are called to be the adults in the room today. We are the ones that are called to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts and do not lean on our own understandings. We've got an even greater responsibility right now in this very moment. We are the ones that God has equipped to put our trust in the Lord and to not rely on our own understanding. We start with the words. We start repeating it. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart as we begin phases of reopening. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart as you make a decision. Is this healthy or not for me? And the promise that we have from God is that as we start with words, God will equip us. God will form us and shape us to be people who do begin to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts and to be people who do not rely on our own understanding. God has created us. God has created us with this almost unwavering desire to be around people that we trust. Just think about it. Just think about it. When you are energized more, when you are more creative, it is when you are around people that you trust, isn't it? We even do this. We even have words that are like this. We're around people that we trust. What do we say about that? Well, you know what? I trust them. I can let my guard down. We also say, not only do I trust them, but I can let my guard down, but no, I trust them. You know what? I can just be myself around them. We do this all the time. That's the inspiration of Proverbs. To trust the Lord with all of our heart, and the challenge that all of us had to face, the challenge that we have to make is to not lean on our own understanding. And this is a big challenge. We look for people who are trustworthy. We look for people that we can be around, that we can let our guard down, just be ourselves. And how often have we been disappointed around people that we thought we could trust? I thought I could trust you. We say that, don't we? You know, I let my guard down around you. Why are we disappointed? Well, it's because we gave them too much of our heart. And it's our fault. It's not theirs. Because what we have done is we have given them too much of our heart, and we have given them too much of our trust. We have offered our whole hearts when God is the only one who is deserving of our whole hearts. This is what it means to not lean on our own understanding. That we have to begin with God and giving our whole heart and our whole trust, and let our relationships flow out of that. Let our connections with other people flow. The beginning starts with giving God our whole hearts and all of our trust. And so if we are in places where we have been disappointed because we have given too much of our hearts, if we're in places where we've been disappointed because the trust that only God should have had, we've given it over to other people, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Well, we have to become, this is the habit that we have to begin to form and shape in our lives. It starts with trust in the Lord with all of your heart as we begin to live our lives. Our everyday lives. It just starts with words. And then it moves to that place where God begins to equip us and to shape us into people who do trust God with all of our hearts. And then we become people who are equipped. The very people who trust in the Lord with all their hearts. And to get there, to truly get there, we have to lean not on our own understanding. And so we say it, God equips us, and then we pick up the challenge and we say, you know what? I'm not going to lean on my own understanding. What it's going to do is it's going to make our relationships 100 times better, because all of a sudden we are placing our trust and our whole hearts in God, where it should be rather than looking for other people to do that in. And we can ensure that we are not disappointed, because what we are moving toward is we are moving toward God equipping us, not our own reliance on ourselves and our own understanding, but reliance on God to equip us as we become people who are trustworthy. One of my favorite theologians, Karl Barth said it like this. He said, sometimes in our lives, oftentimes in our lives, every time in our lives, you know what we have to do? We have to let God be God. That's what it means to not rely on our own understanding. It means that we put our whole trust in God. We give God our whole hearts. We allow God to shape us and equip us into people who trust in God with their whole hearts. And then we let God be God. We do not rely on our own understanding. Let us trust today. Let us trust the Lord our God with all of our heart and give up searching for the perfect person, the perfect job, the perfect church, or even the perfect decline on that coronavirus tracking that all of us are watching and looking for, that downward trend that we can see. The Apostle Paul puts it like this. He says, "For I do not do the good that I want, but the evil that I do not want, that is what I do." Romans chapter 7, verse 19. I encourage you, take some time to read that entire chapter, because that is a chapter where Paul is struggling with relying on his own understanding. He has placed his trust in God, and yet his own understanding keeps on day after day, leading him the good that he desires to do. That's not what he's doing. The evil is what he continues to do. How easy is it? How easy is it for all of us to deceive ourselves, relying on our own understanding, continuing to find ourselves never quite reaching the good that we want to do, yet stumbling each time over the evil that continues to trip us up over and over again. You see, what many of us have never seen are the battles of those who trusted the Lord with all their heart. We have not seen the struggles that they went through, ensuring their own understanding was not in the driver's seat anymore. It was trust in the Lord with all their heart. That's what we saw in them. That's why they energized us. That's why they emerged as spiritual leaders in our conscience, because we saw them after the battles had been won. Today, we are the ones that God is calling to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts. We are the ones that, if we choose to do it, we are the ones God has prepared to equip with this unwavering trust in God that will begin to rise up in us and be seen by those very people who were struggling, not only in the midst of the coronavirus or COVID-19, not only in the midst of this global pandemic, but people who are beginning to struggle with food insecurity, job insecurity, homes that they don't know if they're going to be able to keep, apartments that they are concerned about how they're going to make next month's rent. And that trend is only going to continue to go up, reaching proportions that our country has not faced since the time of the Great Depression. We are the ones called to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts and to finally put to rest our own understanding and lean into God in this very moment of crisis. Because it is only as we trust in the Lord with all of our hearts, only if we lean not on our own understanding, that we will become the people who in all of our ways, do you remember that? Who in all of our ways acknowledge God. Our lives will acknowledge God, even before the very first word comes out of our mouth. Certainly in this moment, when our churches are unable to meet in public worship, when many people are concerned about what's going to come next, we are the ones that God has chosen to acknowledge God's presence in the world, and we are the ones that God has equipped to walk the very path that God is straightening right before our very own eyes. The prophet Isaiah says about God, he says, I am about to do a new thing. Do you not see it? Do you not perceive it? You see, the straight path is emerging for those who put all of their trust in the Lord. The straight path that acknowledges God is emerging right in front of us if we are willing to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts and finally put to rest the reliance that we place so much on our own understanding. Remember Jesus' call? Do you remember Jesus' call to a group of fishermen? Jesus came to them and said the only words, follow me, and now you will be fishing for people. Remember that? That's what a straight path looks like. That's the straight path that begins to emerge. As Jesus came to this group of fishermen, he said, come follow me. You're not going to be fishing in the water. You're going to be fishing for people. That's what a straight path looks like. That's how it begins to emerge in the midst of us. And as those disciples, and you can read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you can see it. As those disciples began to follow Jesus, they found that straight path that began to emerge and rise up right before them, they found that in the many ways that they were acknowledging God's presence in their lives and in their neighborhoods and their communities was more transformative than they could ever have imagined. Even when they were rising early in the morning and sitting in that fishing boat and watching God's majesty unfold in front of them as the sun began to rise. You see, that is what can happen. When we trust in the Lord with all of our hearts, when we do not lean on our own understanding, when we let our lives become lives that acknowledge the very presence of God, there is a straight path that will begin to emerge right in front of us. And we, in the many ways that God has formed us and shaped us over the years, we are the very ones who will begin to walk on that straight path and have a much more transformative life than we could have ever imagined. Today, we are the ones. We are the ones that are called to emerge as people who trust in the Lord with our whole hearts. We have seen it in others, and today is the call for us to become those people. Today, we are the ones who are called to give up our own understanding. And in the midst of crisis, aren't we willing to do this? Is it this, to trust in the Lord with all of our heart? Is it this a new habit that you want to form in your own life in a post-COVID world? To be a person who trusts in the Lord with their whole heart, what would that look like around your friends? What would that look like around your family? What would that do in your neighborhood if you were that person who trusted in the Lord with all of your heart and did not rely on your own understanding? Yet while we give up our own understanding, we become those spiritual giants who trust in the Lord with all of our hearts. We become those very people who acknowledge God's presence here in the midst of crisis. We become those people. And we finally become the adults in the room, walking straight paths that are more transformative than we could have ever imagined when we were trying to make it on our own. This is what happens when we trust in the Lord with all of our heart, and when it becomes a habit and not merely a quote that we lift up from the Bible, or not merely a print that we hang up on our walls in our homes or our offices. But this is what happens when it becomes a habit in our lives. We become the adults in the room. We become the spiritual giants. Don't our families, doesn't our world, doesn't our neighborhood deserve that right now in the midst of this crisis? Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. It's the first step. Let us go in peace. Amen and amen.